But let's switch focus and now focus on you because I'm very curious about your early wrestling career, but before that, your fandom leading into it. If you had a fandom leading into it,
I had a huge fandom,
when did
huge
you
fandom.
first see wrestling? Who was your early on favorites? What attracted you to it?
So I first saw wrestling 1985-ish, right around the first WrestleMania. And so, I was a little dude. I was young and I was, impressionable. And I remember, I think I was over at my grandma's house and we're flipping the channels, or I guess back then it might have been flipping the channels. And it was a Saturday morning and wrestling was on. And I remember it was Andre the Giant when he would wrestle, like three enhancement talents they'd send out there. And he'd get them in the corner and the big shoulder tackles and stacked them up and sat on them and waved. And I was like, what is this? And I remember vividly it was that. And then like the LJN Wrestling Superstars commercials for the figures back in the day when they had like all the it was like Hulk Hogan and Big John Studd were going at it in the living room, and Jimmy Superfly Snuka came off the top of the staircase, and the Iron Sheik was there, and it was like just so colorful that I just started watching it religiously. And of course, in that period, which was the heyday of Hulkamania, I got sucked in, and have to admit I was definitely a big time Hulkamania.
It makes sense. I mean, those larger than life characters, it's hard to, I wasn't from the 80s. I was born in 91, but I've
Mm-hmm.
still went, new generation and attitude era. And sometimes it's hard to explain today because there's so much more grounded in realism, which is great. But some people can't really grasp the appeal of the over the top Hulk Hogan, but there's just something really magnetic, especially as a kid for it.
Oh, for sure. And then he's taken, I mean, the first show that I ever went to was at the LA Sports Arena, which, was controversially the home of WrestleMania 7 as well, which is no longer there. Now it's Bank of California Stadium. But I went to a house show right around that time that I started watching, like third grade. And the main event was Hogan and Big John Studd with Bobby Heenan was there, and it was body slam challenge, and Hogan body slammed him on the outside of the ring, and everybody went crazy. And then Heenan got on the mic, "It's got to be in the ring, dummy," and ran off with the money. And I mean, just back then, if you just think of how the colorful characters, and it really fit in with just pop culture at the time. I mean, everything was big and colorful in the 80s, from music to action movies to video games. The arcades were blowing up, and obviously was huge. It was just very, very over the top stuff, and it was a blast. So I got hooked on the characters. I mean, when you had Hulk and Roddy Piper, and then they're next thing you know, they're spawning into a cartoon with rock and wrestling, and Saturday night's main event. I just remember really falling in love with. That was my favorite show because I love, and it's funny because we actually kind of replicated this when we did Primetime Live, or started Primetime Live with weekly pay-per-view series in the pandemic. Is we started with very much reminiscent of Saturday night's main event, I should say, promos, the colorful promos with the green screen, with the backgrounds behind them and the logos. And I just remember just absolutely, loving that, and the music. And it was Saturday night's main event was such a great show because on the weekends you would see a lot of squash matches, and then in segments, you'd have Piper's Pit, you'd have interview segments like that, or the Snake Pit, to build matches. But Saturday night's main event, you saw, back when it was just the big four, and it was Survivor Series and Royal Rumble and WrestleMania and SummerSlam. Those Saturday night's main events really bridged the gap and gave you those blow offs to big feuds. And so I fell in love with it. I was all in. I had all the LJN figures.